So do you remember in Star Wars, and please forgive me, I'm not like a major, gigantic Star Wars fanatic. I'm a fan, but I'm not a fanatic. But do you remember when Luke was talking to Darth Vader and he said, "I am your father"?
Right.
How was my impression?
Well, I mean, that was a pretty good impression.
Let me hear yours.
That was Darth Vader that said that.
Who did I say?
Luke.
Oh, I did say Luke?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I'm sorry. You remember when that just killed the whole thing. You remember when Darth Vader said, "Luke, I am your father"?
No, that's not true.
Okay, so let's just say that was like a very defining moment for both of them in the movie, right?
Right.
So how do you define yourself? That's a pretty deep question, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, let's jump into that.
This is Mikel-Claire.
And this is Trey.
And we are the couple of entrepreneurs. We're here to share with you our journey of successes and setbacks as we enter the world of entrepreneurship now that we no longer have 9-to-5s due to the new normal of the world and the pandemic.
Join us as we race the clock to start earning money, gain consistency, and overcome self-doubts and uncertainty as we search for our voices and obtain personal and financial growth.
Okay, well, I gotta give you an A for effort regarding your Star Wars. I gotta give you like a C- regarding the accuracy, but that's okay.
Please forgive me, every Star Wars fan out there. Please don't unsubscribe just because of my faux pas.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that is a very defining moment. Who are you? Wow. Do I know who I am? Yeah, I think I've got a pretty good grasp of who I am. I think it changes over the years. I'm not the same person I am today as I was like 10 years ago, through that growth and development and stuff. But I do think that having a good grasp on who I am helps me get through my day-to-day life a whole lot easier. How about you? Do you know who you are?
I think for the most part I do. Sometimes, you kind of lose yourself depending on what role you may have to play in your life and your relationships. But I think for the most part, I'd say I'm about 85-ish% sure I know who I am.
Okay, well, let's put that 85-ish% to the test. How do you define yourself?
First and foremost, I'd have to say I'm a mom. Because 10 years ago, that became the extreme priority, top of the list type of situation.
Okay.
So I definitely define myself not only as a mom, but as a pretty good mom. I'm definitely a Black woman. That there's no mistaking that.
Nope.
As well. I define myself as a daughter, as a partner, as a sister, as a granddaughter. So those are all things. As an entrepreneur, as a podcaster.
Yeah.
As a baker. So those are all things that are, ways that I define myself. I'm trying to think if there are others that are like more deep or more, I don't know, something. But what about you? How do you define yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of setting the bar. I definitely define myself as a God-fearing man. Yeah.
Lightning has come down from the heavens.
I believe in something bigger than myself.
I know you do.
I do. I believe I define myself as somebody who is notorious for making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. I define myself as somebody who is courageous and is willing to take steps into the unknown just to kind of see what happens. I define myself as an entrepreneur, as a Black man through and through. I define myself as a father, a very good and loyal friend who will break his back for the ones that he loves. I define myself as a son, as a father. Let's see. I define myself as a hustler. I define myself as someone that loves to laugh. And I define myself as somebody that will give you an uncomfortable truth if you ask me for it. And I define myself as lovingly fallible. Yeah, some of that stuff actually, even saying that stuff out loud, it kind of feels a little odd. When you define yourself on a big, gigantic platform, I think it's think it's an interesting thing to bring up because we have these thoughts of who we are inside of our heads, and we constantly redefine who we are with our own like inner monologue in those quiet moments that we have with ourselves or with our creator or whatever it is that you define. And then there's how you see yourself in public, and how you define yourself to people out loud when they can see you or if they're close enough to touch you. Those are like different kinds of like comfort levels too. Do you feel that you're comfortable with yourself in all those different ways of defining yourself?
I'm comfortable with certain things, like you said, in my head. Like I can say, hey, I'm a great mom in my head. But even saying that, like you said, out loud feels a little strange. But I am a great mom. But then when I think about like putting that out there, even like on this public platform, it feels a little awkward. It feels a little uncomfortable because I think about all the people that are A, possibly judging, or B, not agreeing. And that's frightening. So are you comfortable being with yourself? And is there a difference between like the veil of like the internet or versus like in-person type of comfort?
Yeah, there's different levels of comfort regarding on who I'm defining myself to. When I'm defining myself to myself, I can be very hard on myself, extremely hard on myself, because in my head, I really do ask myself uncomfortable questions, and I have to try and figure that out. And usually when I get those answers, those defining moments within my head end up becoming my physical truth in the real world outside of that conversation in my head. I end up being that person that I've decided that I'm going to be from that conversation. And then like in person, it's a little bit different. I'm certainly a lot more bold in real life than I am in my head. But then there's a whole other level again, which is funny because online I feel a little more cautious because my real life isn't being recorded per se. And there's like an erase feature that's automatic just because people will forget some of the details of conversations that you've had with somebody or forget, how you took a stand on, I don't know, some topic at a coffee shop or whatever it is. But online on the internet, there is no erase button. What you say is out there and it sticks. So when when I'm being my authentic self online, I really do take those few milliseconds or a couple of seconds or even a minute to just think what it is out that I'm about to say, because there's no real takebacks. Once it's out there and you have to live with that. So there is varying levels of comfort regarding who I define myself to be. Well, with that being said, especially regarding media in general, be it television, movies, online, or even when you're meeting somebody in person and you get that first impression. A lot of people say you never get a second chance to make a first impression and that it holds the absolute most importance. Is that just a bunch of a cool thing to say? Or to me, it feels a little overrated. How do you feel about that?
I think a first impression that somebody gives is absolutely how you will continue to view them. If someone says something that completely offends you or something that brings you absolute joy or, just depending on what they say, you're going to remember that. You are, like, especially if it's one extreme or another. If somebody offends me in some way, says something about, women or black people or just, something that's completely offensive, I'm going to remember that.
Right.
And if you're a politician, I won't vote for you. If you're somebody in my peer group, I'm not going to want to listen to you or get to know you.
Okay.
So I think it's very, very difficult to reverse that once that impression is in my head. And if it's a good impression, it's the same thing. It takes a lot for me to be like, oh, they're horrible if they've made me laugh or made me smile or made me feel good about myself.
Right.
So I think first impressions are something that people definitely hold on to and grasp onto in building a relationship with whoever that person is. Yeah. But you said you feel like they're overrated. What is it that makes you think that, or why don't you feel like first impressions are a real thing?
I believe in second chances. And I do believe that there is a power in a first impression, and it does kind of set the tone and set the standard. A perfect example is one of my best friends in the world. Me and him did not get along at first. Matter of fact, we used to fight, and it wasn't until I kind of like stood up to him because he was bigger than me. You know, I wouldn't call him a bully. We were just dumb kids. But the day I kind of like stood up to him, everything changed. And we became like really good friends, like really, really good friends. So my first impression of him was somebody that I despised and feared. And that's not a really good feeling. And now I don't fear him at all. And especially didn't fear him after I stood up to him. But I got a chance to understand why his actions were the way they were and why he responded to me the way he did. So that very first impression has been completely overwritten. It doesn't even hold any value anymore outside of it being that's just what happened. I was fortunate enough to be given time to see that second chance. Most times when you meet somebody, the very first impression is the last impression that you're going to get from them, because you're not going to give them another opportunity to kind of change the way that you think about them. So I do believe first impressions do carry a weight, but I don't believe it is the end all and the final say regarding you meeting that person for the first time.
I don't think it's necessarily the final say necessarily, but I'm just curious, like if somebody did or said something or defined themselves in a way that was completely offensive, would you, at this space in your life, because I know the example you gave, you were much younger, would you be so willing to give somebody a second chance? And I mean, like, their first impression was like horrendous.
Now, because we're living in a time where things are extremely polarizing, and if you have a social media feed, then you already know those individuals that you've barely known that you just recently added to your social media, be it Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is. And then that message pops up on your timeline. That's something that goes completely against what you initially thought of that person. It can be hurtful and it can be unforgiving in a lot of cases. I'm very unforgiving now as an old man. As I've gotten older, I'm not as forgiving regarding some things. And I think social media has kind of like burned me on that, especially with things being so defining. So I can see where you're coming from when you're saying like, okay, they said something completely inflammatory and I'm done with it. And I have lived that way. But I'm sure if I gave myself the benefit of the doubt and gave them the benefit of the doubt and really got a chance to get to know the person, to figure out why they said what they said, there is a good, strong possibility that I would change the way I view them. But that's one of those things that sounds good on a Hallmark card. It's one of those things that sounds good at the end of a family television show that you see on Saturday mornings. The reality is that I'm done with you. I don't want to spend the energy to try to get to know you, and you're automatically deleted off my feed. I'm not going to bother with you anymore because it's going to take time and effort for me to even try to figure out a way to have a casual conversation with you. It's just not worth the effort. And I think most people kind of feel that way as well, especially regarding those type of platforms.
Well, and the thing is, I think in the example you gave, you were saying somebody that you already know, and we're talking about first impression. So if it's somebody that it's the first time I've ever met them or seen anything that they've said, right, I'm really not going to spend the energy because I don't know you and I don't have time to figure out why you said it, or right, and there's no real reason to if I'm so offensive or whatever is so offensive to them. So that's interesting, though. We're talking kind of like about the hazards of maybe like a bad first impression, but are there any hazards to being authentic and being your true self?
I think it takes a lot of courage to be yourself. I think that's the last frontier of self-development, is knowing who you are and finding peace in that space. And the hazard of that is that your ultimate truth, more than likely, there's going to be somebody in the world that doesn't agree with it. I don't care what it is. I don't care how amazing and fluffy you think it is. There's going to be somebody in this world that doesn't like it. and they're probably going to be very vocal about it. And if you're somebody who isn't confident in yourself, you'll try to appease other people, and you'll kind of go to the flow of what the masses are saying, and you'll be pushed into like this area of being fake. You're trying to appease everyone, and that's just impossible. I think the other real hazard of being true and real to yourself and being authentic is sometimes things can get lost in translation with your truth. And you may think one specific thing, but may not have enough time to explain it. That person takes it as that first impression, runs off with it, and then you never see him again. And there is a hazard of kind of like living in the moment. Those two kind of like tie together because you don't really know what you're going to say. A perfect example is this podcast. There are things that we may say and do that after we get done saying it, we go back and edit the podcast and we're like, let's take out some of these ums and ahs, and maybe that particular sentence didn't go well. Our real authentic live moment isn't exactly what you're getting in the final process of this. This is just the truth of podcasts, and it's not anything unique to this particular show. Most podcasts do this. It's edited and kind of scrubbed, so it's not 100% authentic because there is a hazard, and the hazard is the ums, the ahs, the stuttering, the long pauses of trying to get your thoughts together and stuff. Real life and living in the moment is messy, but that's what makes it so intriguing and makes you want to tune in and listen because you don't know what's going to happen. So you have to be comfortable in living in that hazardous kind of unsanitized viewpoint of yourself, if that makes sense. How about you? It's a jungle out there. How are you surviving?
Well, I have my machete. Apparently, I have some bug spray and a knapsack to keep, first aid kit and things like that. But it's for me, like the hazards of being authentic. And I think you touched on this a little bit in your answer. There will absolutely be people that don't like you. But that's even if you're fake, if you're authentic, no matter what you are, there's going to be people that don't like you.
That's very true.
So that's definitely a hazard, because if you have something to say and people are just hating on it all left and right, that's a hazard to you continuing to be authentic. Mm-hmm. And another thing is being vulnerable is not easy. That's a hazard, because if you want to be your true self and portray yourself in the way that's honest, then you have to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And that's very difficult. It's difficult because people aren't going to receive you necessarily, and because you might fear being your true self and what you have to say, and just people not receiving it in the way that you might hope that they would. So for me, in that jungle, those are the two biggest things for me to kind of try to deal with as a hazard in being my true self. Are you capable of actually telling a fake person from an authentic one?
At first impression, no. No, not within like that first couple of minutes of meeting somebody. It's not typically until the second encounter, and then things don't start kind of like lining up that I can tell. And absolutely any encounter after that, because then you start getting like more data per se of who this person is, what they stand for, who, and all of that. It's difficult to sniff out a fake in the very beginning, but that's how people get duped. That's how people get suckered into buying things they may not need, or suckered into believing and voting for a certain politician because they've only heard one speech, or duped into all kinds of random things because they just don't have enough data. A first impression, wow, actually, man, we might have just kind of come circle, because we were talking about how powerful is a first impression. If that's the only piece of information that you have and you can't weigh it against anything else, it is very powerful. Wow. Yeah. So I guess I kind of just re-answered that question again. It's tough to find a fake within the first minute or two of listening to somebody. There are some people that are talented enough to do it off top. I'm just not that talented just yet to be that 100% sure and certain. I know this might sound a little bad, but there is something that may be real or may be fake. I don't know, but there's the woman's intuition. I don't know if that falls into this category as well, but is that like a thing that can be used to figure out fake people, or do you have a whole other system?
It's funny, when you were talking, before you had even mentioned it, I did think about intuition. I didn't make it specific to women. I generalize it to everybody, and just your own intuition that you have regarding your impression of people. And I don't mean you, I'm talking about you in the general sense. Mm-hmm. I think it can be difficult. I think initially it's like a judgment. It's not actual knowing exactly how that person is or who they really are, because like you said, you don't have enough information. I do give credit to intuition though, because you have a sense about people, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. But I would say 90% of the time you should go with your intuition or your gut feeling about somebody, because if there's something that seems a little off, there's a reason for that. So I don't know. Would I say that I in particular can tell if someone is being fake? I want to say yes, but I don't know if that's being honest or if that's just me wanting to say, hey, yeah, I can definitely tell, like giving myself more credit. Do I define myself as someone who can distinguish someone being fake? Probably not. But believe your intuition if you feel it. But then if not, then definitely gather additional information before you judge somebody about anything.
It seems like it's a really treacherous path, trusting in somebody initially. Well, with all that being said, what is the purpose of being real with your audience or customers?
In order to establish a rapport, because in relationships, rapport and trust are like the two biggest things, especially if you're spending money. Let's talk about that. If you're spending money, you need to know that you can trust somebody, that if they say, hey, this is a quality product, hey, this is the information that you're going to get, hey, I'm not going to use your credit card to buy something else. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of establish that rapport and that trust before you can even gain them as a customer, or as a kind of like a customer / friend type of situation. And then also it's like being relatable and reliable. So if someone can relate to you on a level of being human and being a person or being a mom or however you define yourself, if they can relate to you, and then depending on what your product is, then they'd be more willing to believe what you say about whatever the product is or how it helped you or how it made your life better. Right. Also, being that go-to person so that they can get answers that are sincere or that are experts, so to speak.
Right.
You have to be real with them in order for them to get answers from you or come to you as that expert or that professional. What do you think? Is there a real purpose of being real with your audience or your customers?
As I've gotten older, one of the things that sticks out the most is how much energy am I going to be spending in almost every endeavor. Time and energy are just two big things. And for me, being insincere and being fake requires more time in order for you to constantly remember the lie or the fakeness that you're doing so that you can continue to tell that story over and over and over again. It expends too much time and energy in order to keep telling that fake tale over and over again, when it's just so much easier to just be authentic. Because then when you come back to the microphone or you come back to the platform, you can just be you, and it's easy. And when it's easy, you're more comfortable. And when you're more comfortable, people will trust in you more because you give off like a bad vibe if you're tense and you're trying to figure out, man, was this the real lie that I said before, or I'm willing to do anything I can in order to get this sale. You can kind of like feel that. It gives people a bad intuition to use tools from other questions. And when you're more sincere, it makes bonding a lot easier. And if you're bonding, then more than likely people are trusting you. And if they're trusting you, then they're more willing to listen to whatever service or product that you're trying to sell. So it's just easier all the way around. In the long run, it's easier. Now, not to say that being insincere can't benefit you if you're trying to make a quick buck. But then you have to look at yourself in the mirror the next day. And you also realize that you've burned some people that will probably never come back over that bridge again in order to mess with you. So you've just wasted time and energy for a one-time go. If you're trying to build something for the long term, then it needs a foundation of trust and a foundation of sincerity.
So right now, I'm going to define you as that person that typically puts a pin in things. Is that accurate?
Oh, Yeah, hold on. Let me go through my defining bag real quick and find this Oh, here it is. And we are sticking a pin in this bad boy.
I call that a defining moment, Trey.
If you want a defining moment, please hit that subscribe button and realize that you have been listening to The Couple of Entrepreneurs. Make sure you tell your friends, family, everybody that we're talking about being sincere. We're a couple of real people that's out here trying to get money. We're trying to get it through the goods, the bads, the amazings, and let you know that it can be done and that you too can have the confidence to live a different life. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.